This boss is fighting us with a weaponized womb. What more needs to be said? This game is amazing. Morbid, the 7 Acolytes was developed by a studio containing a mere 6 people, which is truly commendable because this game is fantastic. It's rare that a title comes along which I adore nearly every second of, but this one managed to pull it off with gusto. I mean, you saw the intro. One boss is literally a demented and heartbroken almost mother who's using her still dead babyful womb to bash the player. What more needs to be said? It's grisly, edgy, morbid, and oh so much fun. It's being marketed by publisher Merge Games as an isometric Souls-like, but similar to my very recent Chronos Before the Ashes review, I disagree with that. It shares many qualities with such games, but just like Chronos, dying doesn't really result in dropped experience that the player must then rush back and retrieve before permanently losing it. And that, to me, is absolutely vital to any title that wants to sit on the Souls throne. So more accurately, I would simply call Morbid an isometric action RPG. Maybe that's nitpicking, but I don't have a lot of negatives to say about this one, so I'll at least call out the publisher for mislabeling it. Suck on that, capitalism. Stupid jokes and nitpicks aside though, it's also being pushed as a horror punk love letter to Lovecraft and Cronenberg, and my god, did they absolutely nail it. The atmosphere is spooky, mushy, and moist. Blood is everywhere and it just feels fantastically icky. In boss fights, gore splatters the environment and sticks to whatever it touches. While exploring the world, the player encounters barrels oozing with human remains, along with devious plants called ground spores that'll decorate nearby objects with scarlet stuff when swung at. It's during these moments that they also release fleshy flying bastards that go for your face with the intent of killing you. Nothing in this universe can be trusted, and nearly everything will cover you red. It's only a 2D game and a pixelated one at that, but what the developers have pulled off with its design is nothing short of awesome. That awesomeness extends to the boss fights, which are both satisfyingly challenging and epic in scope. In the interest of not spoiling too much, I'm limited what I show, but go back to how I opened this video and dwell on the music and the hard hits of the weaponized womb. There's a fine dance between the grieving mother and I as I work tirelessly to properly manage my stamina while avoiding being hit with the bag of baby sludge. The visuals, the challenge, and the sound come together in nearly every fight to provide a feast for the senses. And shockingly, nearly every boss fight does reach these highs. They're so well designed. Think challenging but fair, and holy shit, let me emphasize challenging, more specifically one towards the end. I think it's best for people to see them fresh, so I won't show the clip here, but you fight 2 at once in an arena spewing fireballs, so not only must you dodge pyrotechnics, but you must also dodge projectiles being thrown by one of the 2 bosses, while avoiding being hit by the other who goes for melee. Throw in the difficult stamina management, and it may have taken me a few tries to get it perfected, as well as a few fucks yelled loudly, but that's what made everything memorable. I never felt I died to cheap deaths in these fights. I died due to my own human error, and it was a pleasure to practice and get better. This is a peak get good meme game, and hey, I know I'm being overwhelmingly positive, which is certainly rare for my reviews, but in the one day it took me to jam out a playthrough, including getting the platinum, humble brag, I sat at my desk with a stupidly satisfying grin on my face. In the year of our Lord 2020, I was having fun. And I didn't know such a thing was possible. As a game journalist, aren't I supposed to fucking hate video games? At least, that's what I've gathered from my peers. But really, unrelenting praise aside, there are actually a few things I wish were different. The game just kinda begins with the protagonist passed out on a beach with no real wind-up or explanation for who you are or why you're there, and a minor cutscene laying the foundation of what's to come would have been neat, even if just something to show off the world and what's happening within it. That doesn't mean the story is bad though. There's satisfying lore to be dug up, much of it tucked away in NPC conversations, item descriptions, and a convenient encyclopedic tool called the Morbid Menagerie. Through my readings of the lore in my discussions with NPCs, the best way to describe the plot is that you take on the role of the last surviving striver. This means you've spent your life training to take on the 7 Acolytes. These are essentially a conglomerate of terrifying foes who are infested with evil entities called Gahars. Long ago, the Gahars invaded the land of Mornia and enslaved their realm, but thankfully for you, and your fellow citizens, they can't survive without a host. So by killing the 7 Acolytes, you can free your people. So that's why you're there. As you've no doubt figured out, the goal of the game is to kill the 7 major bosses. There's also 5 sub-bosses linked to side quests, and these fights can be equally imposing if you're not well equipped. Combat plays out as you would expect of a title like this. It's ultimately a balancing act of managing health and stamina. Each action seeps stamina, and if you run out, you leave yourself open, unable to swing or dodge roll away. Swinging melee weapons works on a 2-button system, or what amounts to a heavy and light attack. Here it's just called attack and special attack, but it's a traditional Souls-like combat system, with the only exception being that the player uses the face buttons and not the triggers. Well, minus the parry, which is linked to L1. At any one time, you can have 2 weapons equipped, something melee-based and a gun, of which given the length of the title, there's more variety than I initially expected. I counted about 30 weapons in total, technically more if you include gun variations. For my first playthrough, I was most reliant on a crossbow and a sword or spear. A qualm I hold here is that inventory management can be a pain. As you defeat bosses and explore the world, breaking open chests and looting bodies, you obtain weapons which take up more and more space, yet these can't be stored at health shrines. So as you collect too many you like but run out of space, you eventually need to make concessions and abandon them. I was convinced there had to be a store or storage somewhere, and I reached out to the devs to see if I'd missed some stupidly obvious NPC or something, but no. They confirmed that items you can't carry must be left behind. So best advice, don't get attached to weapons you swear to yourself you may want to use later. Thankfully, to help balance out the weapons are runes. All melee weapons and guns can have a number of them attached, although how many each one holds can vary. But regardless, if you become attached to something early on, with the right runes it can still serve you well even as you head towards the final boss. I was most fond of those which increased my attack speed, but there's elemental buffs and other things to choose from, further aiding you on your journey or quick use items. There's genetically modified broccoli, which permits a short burst of infinite stamina, limbs which drain your sanity, more on that in a bit, but increases the damage of your attacks, buff shrooms which offer different buffs based on what you eat, and you get the idea. These kinda come in limited supply, though you can grind for more, but one item that'll always be with you is the Stone of Dibrum, or Dibrum, or however it's pronounced. Think of this as your Estus flask. It refills upon your death, and upgrades for it can be found, increasing how many times it's used. Speaking of upgrades, very early on I was thrown for a loop because I was earning experience points and I could not figure out how to use them. You don't level up as you might in a traditional RPG, and it took some time for the game to make this clear. Instead, after, and only after you've defeated the first Acolyte, you discover something called a praying statue. In lore, these are described as statues filled with blessings which were hidden by ancient monks of Magrathias when the Gahars arrived and began demolishing temples. It's these blessings that the player receives after smashing the hidden statues that are what experience points are used for. There's 15 blessings in total, and by the game's end I was able to equip 7 of them at a time, and these do things like give your character more health, faster stamina regeneration, and extra firearm damage. It's while visiting shrines tucked throughout the world that a menu can be accessed and experience points spent to upgrade them. Each can be leveled up 5 times, and each upgrade costs more than what came before, but these bonuses are fantastic. I had quite a chunky health bar because of them. To backtrack quickly just a little bit to my mention of sanity, this is an additional meter, and the lower it falls, the less damage you dish, and the less experience you gain. Providing extra pressure is that if it falls too much, specters will begin to make an appearance. These are essentially ghosts of the enemies you just killed, and it means having to fight them a second time. This can lead to some challenging moments if you're low on health, so be smart and keep an eye on the thing. If there's one area where the game most fails, it's that it can be too easily cheesed in a few places. Some enemies can become forcefully locked in an animation loop which prevents them from attacking you. This I found by walking upwards, winding up my special attack, hitting them, dodging downwards, letting my stamina fill. Then as they walked back towards me, I'll do the same thing again. This is achievable because a good number of standard enemies won't attack you diagonally. It's a weird design choice, or perhaps even an oversight. I wouldn't say it necessarily breaks the game, as fairly often you'll be swarmed by more than one foe, and it usually only works when one-on-one, but there were a few times when it got me through a tougher fight. Thankfully, the bosses don't fall into such a trap, and given they're the meat of the experience, I wouldn't have it any other way. Although, disappointingly, one boss did break. It was the very first one, and he got stuck in place. This, I imagine, can be patched out, as it should be, because it's not a one-off issue, as I was able to replicate it on a fresh save file. And truly, that's my last complaint about the game. I utterly adore this one. I think it's exceptionally well crafted. The combat is fun, the boss design's memorable, and the atmosphere top notch. Maybe I'm a glutton for blood and punishment, who can say, but this one certainly served me both, and I moaned in enjoyment because of it. 8.5 out of 10.